The biggest wins in the NHS are cheap. A look at why we keep starving the highest leverage pathway in healthcare by Kellaway. Sponsored by Splows. Spend more time in session and less at your desk. Automated admin end to end. And if you start your trial today, you can enter the draw to win your first year completely free. A community pilot reduced musculoskeletal waiting lists by 20%, and its reward was a national budget smaller than the pilot itself. The announcement, stripped of its press release gloss, identifies an initiative that reduced community musculoskeletal waiting lists by a fifth that is now going national. The reward for that success is a grand total of £3.225 million, which I had to read twice as I was expecting more zeros. The pilot that improved the model in the first place cost £3.5 million. So the reward it has earned, namely the budget to do exactly the same across every health system in England, is somehow smaller than the pilot that produced it. A bit of a backdrop before we get to the outrage, because the scale of it really does matter. Ill health now costs the UK economy somewhere in the region of £212 billion a year, a figure published in last autumn's Keep Britain Working review and worth roughly 7% of GDP. And my dear old friend MSK sits second only to mental health among the drivers of that bill. MSK Mag readers will know that musculoskeletal conditions affect nearly 18 million people in England and account for somewhere between a fifth and a third of GP appointments, depending on whose figures you happen to trust. They also make up a third of the largest area of NHS spend at around £5 billion a year. So when you set the national rollout against that £212 billion, you land at roughly 0.0015% of the problem, which is a rounding error for the Treasury. Let's be clear, none of this is a criticism of the work itself, which is genuinely very good. Get It Right First Time's MSK Community Delivery Programme cut 18-week community waits by 20% across 17 integrated health care boards between December 2024 and March 2025. It did so with deeply unglamorous ingredients, namely community clinics, local clinical leadership and one-stop appointment days that bundle assessment, treatment, mental health support and physical activity into a single visit, rather than scattering them across 4 separate letters and 4 separate days off. There is no miracle buried in any of this, it's just a sensible joined up pathway run by the right people, close to where patients actually live. I have a bit of skin in this game because I spent years involved in one-stop initiatives in orthopaedics and rheumatology, the very kind that Get It Right First Time now references. Their simplicity was a key ingredient in why they worked, with patients seen, assessed, imaged and started on a plan inside a day instead of bouncing around the system for the better part of a year. The point worth holding on to is that the model is genuinely repeatable and translatable, which is to say it's not a clever local fluke that it happened to work because of one brilliant clinical lead. It is a method, and methods can be copied and scaled. Which is exactly where it grates, because the 17 area pilot cost £3.5 million and a second cohort of 6 more areas took another £2.2 million. In effect, the model has now been proved twice across 23 systems and rewarded with a national budget of £3.225 million to cover the entire country. England has 42 integrated care boards, or ICBs, where the pilot areas received up to £300,000 each. The national rollout funding works out closer to £77,000 each per area, which is roughly a third of what the Trailblazers got to do precisely the same job. The unspoken brief reads something like, guys, can you do the same again at scale for less money than you spent the first time? Anyone who has ever run a service will recognise both the request and the quiet despair this ignorance tends to produce. The deeper problem sits underneath the budget line, in the workforce. And I talk about this a lot on my various channels because the gap is real and it is widening. Becoming a physiotherapist today means obtaining near perfect grades, no meaningful tuition concession of the sort we used to offer, a brutal job market the moment you qualify, and a salary that flattens inside a decade. Being good is no longer enough, and there is constant pressure to specialise or to extend scope simply to stay relevant and employable. We have quietly turned, in my opinion, the single most cost-effective profession in healthcare into one of the least attractive to enter, and then we act faintly surprised when the workforce pipeline starts to thin. The opportunity here is enormous, and it is worth being specific about why. The 20% reduction was on the community list, the smaller and earlier queue, which is precisely what makes it exciting rather than marginal. Treat and mobilise people earlier in the community and you take pressure off the trauma and orthopaedics list further downstream, which remains the single largest elective queue in the country. Keeping patients moving at work and off surgical waiting lists will reduce expensive problems in years to come, and those who do still need surgery will arrive in better physical and mental shape, which is a precursor for faster recovery, less time spent in hospital and less cost to the system on the way through. The model also does something rather neat, which deserves more credit. By pulling movement and mental health into the same visit, it chips away at the two biggest contributors to that £212 billion bill at the same time and movement. Psst, it's rather good for the brain as well as the body. The link has been known for years, but we simply do not commission or broadcast it as though we believe it. If the system were serious, and by system I mean something rather more durable than a revolving door of health secretaries, it would do four fairly obvious things. 1. It would fund the workforce in the tens of millions rather than the low single figures. It would treat compliant hybrid digital MSK pathways as a genuine clinical priority where the whole population can access at the front door. It would build in-house rather than reflexively buying off-the-shelf products to fill the gap. This is not complex tech, and return on investment multiplies when there is no license fee going to the external developers. It would actually scrutinise what it has already bought, because a surprising amount of tech has never been shown independently to do very much at all. Don't get me started on a medical device's defined intended use versus how it is being deployed in the system. So here is where I keep landing, as this issue travels a long way beyond MSK. We consistently mistake cost and complexity for value. The expensive, complicated, heavily branded intervention feels serious, so it gets the money and the contract. Meanwhile, the cheap, simple, effective solutions are overlooked, as if it cannot possibly be the answer. Pilots happen, credit ensues, yet the budget to achieve impact at scale never materialises. For me, simple, good physiotherapy is affordable, effective and scalable. Its only real crime is that it is not shiny. So I will leave you with the same question I opened with, because I'm yet to see a satisfying answer. If a pilot scheme can knock a fifth off the waiting list on a shoestring and prove its effectiveness across 23 areas, why on earth are we not throwing cash at it?